Okay, thank you very much for coming. We're going to go in a different direction than was originally planned via the material. I was scheduled, and I'll introduce myself in a second, but I was scheduled to present my reporting software. My name is Adam Mandel, Quantum Clarity is my company, and I developed reporting software that enables, for the first time, a practitioner to give out a 42-page lifestyle report safely to their client. We also have additional softwares called the Piggyback Generator and the Category Report. Piggyback Generator enables you very quickly at the end of a test to import all the add to piggyback codes from that session that day. Rather than using generic lists, it pulls real-time lists which enable you to use real-time codes from your matrix as you add to piggyback and layer your therapies. That's one of our software products. And we also have the category report, which enables the practitioner to assess the client and their fundamental weaknesses during therapy so that assessment and therapy can be done at the same time. They're all very, very cool, and you totally want to check them out on my website, www.quantumclarity.net. You can find our Facebook page, Quantum Clarity, and of course my name. There's a slight variation just because of identity theft. If you're going to look for me on Facebook, you'll find me under Adam Mandel, M-E-N-D-E-L, just so my identity doesn't get stolen and I don't have to cancel all my credit cards. Wonderful. So, here I am. My name is Adam. Many of you I've never met before. I've been in this business, or working with the device rather, for about 16 years. I posted a little bit of my credential on the board for those of you that have never met me. In 2004 to 2008, I ran the Quantum Nights with my partner Roger Lessard. In 4 years, we sold $40 million worth of SCIOs. 40 devices a month, every month. We did 52 trade shows a year. 52. We were the most successful team in the history of the marketing of this device. In 2007, my partner and I, Roger, went into Dubai with the intention of integrating the device directly into the health system, the healthcare system of the United Arab Emirates. We made great inroads into the country. Presently, the Crown family has over 6 devices operating within different aspects of their lives, be it at the Godolphin horse stables, be it right in the palace working on many of the support staff that work on the grounds, as well as the Sheikh's friends and the Sheikh himself, who is 36 years old with type 2 diabetes. So that was an amazingly rich experience to get to work in UAE with the Sheikh and to have those experiences. In 2008, after 2 years of negotiation for the exclusive distribution rights for the SCIO into China, we came to terms, and I was lucky enough to be asked to be the lead therapist to work on the Beijing Olympics. So for 4 months, we ran an amazing program whereby we worked initially testing every single one of the national athletes that would be competing in the games. We then ran a second stage of our program where we worked with symptom management, working to help resolve the symptoms that many of the athletes were experiencing. And then we finalized working in performance enhancement, whereby we did some very exciting work stimulating testosterone and growth hormone, and were able to boast biochemical markers, biochemical evidence, whereby we could, with the device and solely the device, increase HGH levels in our client, very measurable, with no other potential variable. From, I guess the most extraordinary one that we ever saw was 0.49 micrograms per liter, moving up to 9.49 micrograms per liter in a matter of 2 weeks of stimulation. That's over 1,000% increase in HGH levels. It was extraordinary. What we saw was injury repair. What we saw was massive, massive increase in training potential and reduction in overtraining. It was very, very exciting to be part of that, and probably the first evidence-based program whereby we were ever able to, in fact, qualify through biochemical markers the cause and effect of working with this amazing tool. So I have been very blessed throughout my career, and then of course I came back, started Quantum Clarity. I've been teaching on the road for the last 5 years, as well as marketing my software. I generally stick to North America. I try to get out to Europe at least once a year, and most often work my seminars in Holland. Moving into 2017, I'm very excited to be announcing that I'll be doing 6 Europe dates, including France, Germany, Holland, probably Greece, potentially Spain or Portugal, and then I really want to get out to Turkey because it's absolutely beautiful. And I canceled this year, which I wasn't overly pleased about, but I figured bombs and stuff, not the greatest time to go to Turkey. Anyway, so that's who I am, and I'd very much, if we haven't met, like the opportunity to get to know you, and hope to see you soon in 2017 at one of the various locations where my tour will be coming. So before we start, I just really wanted to take a moment, look at everybody in the room, and say thank you. Thank you for being pioneers of a device, of a new paradigm which experiences such vast resistance. Thank you for having the courage to persevere. Thank you for staying within this industry. As many of us know, for the last few years, we've been going through, let's say, a reorganization or a restructuring, working to find our new ground. And that process having been very frustrating for many of you, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for using your device. Thank you for working with your, and thank you for challenging the status quo every morning when you wake up. I truly believe that this device, as you can see right here, this is part of my inroads in China and what we're doing, working to distribute solely into the hospitals. You can see the direction that we're going, and I fully believe that this device can serve as the bridge to integrate holism and mainstream approaches to medicine into a proper model which in fact actually takes care of the needs of the individual. I believe our device is the gateway, and my work is solely at this point focused on building that bridge and seeing us realize what is our true potential. This device is so fundamentally important, especially for what we're about to go into today. Rather than talk to you about my software and have you sit through another commercial, which is what I did not want to do, I wanted to present something of value. So presently, we exist in a time whereby I'm sure every single person in this room has had direct encounter working in practice, be it with friends, family, or clients, working with any one of these neurosystemic degenerative diseases. And this year when I went on tour, what I wanted to do was I wanted to teach what my students and the attendees wanted. Rather than propose my own curriculum, I wanted the feedback from the community as to what the community wanted. Through my Facebook page, it was very obvious that everybody wanted to work on neurosystemic. And the reason is because this is becoming the most prevalent issue facing the human health experience, in my understanding, based on my research, that we've ever really faced. This is not an acute issue. This is something which has been designed to be chronic, covert, and disempowering to the human species. And in my experience, one of the only tools available for resolution that I've come across anyways, other than different supportives, really is this device. So what I'm proposing today, and proposing on my lecture, what I've done here is I've compiled a 3-day course that I've been teaching this year down to an hour and a half. So we've cut out a lot, and I'm just going to get directly into the meat of the conversation. Now, normally I would take you through things such as, because I very much prefer quoting a very official source, The majority of my material in this lecture has been either taken from the CDC, Center for Disease Control, Bethesda, Maryland University, particularly in the study department of neurosystemic disease. And I've also taken my material from Dr. Mercola's site and a few other British journals and British sources. When I began to investigate these diseases, I was appalled and shocked to affirm some material that I had come across years ago. However, this material, which at the time was non-conventional, has become conventional. In this lecture, I hope to show you that fibromyalgia, MS, Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer, chronic fatigue syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, even heart disease, and the list goes on, are all stemming from the same covert weaponized pathogen. From the same covert weaponized pathogen. Weaponized pathogen, biowarfare. Okay, follow the lecture, you'll get it. As well as the associative co-infections. So we're gonna go into the material and ultimately we're gonna look for the wizard. Do you know what I mean? Remember the Wizard of Oz? Don't look behind the curtain. We're gonna look behind the curtain. So prepare. Okay, the title page of a genuine US Senate study declassified February 24th, 1977, and this is scary, shows that Dr. George Merck of the pharmaceutical company Merck Sharp Dome, which now makes the cures for the diseases that they one time created, reported in 1946 to the US Secretary of War that his research had managed for the first time to isolate a disease agent in crystalline form. Do you know what that means, a disease agent in crystalline form? What it means is they isolated the disease itself from the bacterial. So they took a bacterium, they isolated the disease, and they then had it in crystalline form. And why is that important? They had produced a crystalline bacteria from the Brucellobacterium. The bacterial toxin could be removed in crystalline form and stored, transported, and deployed without deterioration. So if you know the history of biowarfare agents, ultimately what they've been looking for is something that is not an acute epidemic, but something rather that would be covert, adaptive, and unable to be found. This is why it was so fundamentally important for them to extract, and something that would be safe to be stored and able to be transported. It could be delivered by vectors such as insects, aerosols, the food chain. In nature, it's delivered within the bacterium via prions. Even in nature, in our agriculture now, we are finding prion crystals, weaponized prion crystals. So they were investigating into insects. They were investigating with infecting mosquitoes and setting them loose. And then all of us have seen this over all of our cities. Chemtrails. Somebody was talking to me yesterday about a particular man who's been collecting rain samples, snow samples all over the world, and looking at what's coming through, and he's finding things like cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus. Of course, as we get further into understanding things such as the mycoplasma, what you're going to see is that the mycoplasma itself is undetectable. It has been designed to be undetectable and not able to be observed by design. So we've all seen this. We all know that these epidemics are prevalent. And how many of you are seeing more fibro clients, more Lyme clients, more ALS clients, MS clients in your practice than ever before? What we're seeing statistically, if you actually look at the statistics right now, is that by 2025, all of these neurosystemic diseases will hit doubling points. Presently, for an example, Lyme disease right now is the 5th most reported disease in the United States, and the #1 vector, and this was directly through the Center for Disease Control, the #1 vector disease in the US. There's a reason for that, and we'll discover it as we go further into this presentation. Okay, so the factor that's working in this brucella that we're talking about is mycoplasma. The pathogen mycoplasma used to be very innocuous, but biological warfare research conducted between 42 and present time has resulted in the creation of more deadly and infectious forms of mycoplasma. Again, research has extracted the mycoplasma from the brucella bacterium and actually reduced it in its crystalline form. They weaponized it and they tested it on an unsuspecting North American public. Further in this lecture, I'm going to show you some maps. Those maps are very telling and very, very disturbing because it's very obvious to see that this was done in a very calculated way. Again, remember, first, you have Dr. Merck in 46 who isolated the pathogen. Remember that. And it's important because we already said, and here we go, in 1998 at an NIH meeting, National Institute of Health, meeting in Bethesda University at Maryland, Dr. Maurice Hillman, the chief virologist for the pharmaceutical company Merck Sharp Dome, stated that this disease agent is now carried by everybody in North America and possibly most people in the world. It's very interesting because these days we're having conversations about the things that we're seeing, such as autism, the things that we're seeing, such as these neurosystemic diseases. And there's really great arguments that are being proposed as to, from both sides, as to vaccination is the cause, fundamental antibiotic is the cause. Yet there's equal argument on the other side of the table, of course, as there always will be. You know, Big Pharma argued for 25, or Big Tobacco argued for 25 years that cigarettes don't hurt you and did so successfully in the courts in the United States. So, this doesn't get more obvious, however. Initially, in 46, Dr. Merck reduces this pathogen and creates a crystalline disease. In 1998, the chief virologist for the same company says everybody's now infected with this. Do you think it was done in a calculated way? Really? Why would they want to make us sick? No, the government loves us. Despite reporting flaws, there has clearly been an increase in incidence of neurosystemic degenerative disease since World War II, and especially since the 1970s, with the arrival of previously unheard of diseases like chronic fatigue syndrome and AIDS. This gets appalling the further I go, just so you know. According to Dr. Shai Lo Ching, the senior researcher of the Armed Forces Institute, Institute of Pathology, and one of America's top mycoplasma researchers, this disease agent causes many illnesses, including AIDS, cancer, chronic fatigue syndrome, Crohn's colitis, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, Wegener's disease, collagen vascular diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis and Alzheimer's, and the list actually goes on. Doesn't end there. Dr. Charles Engel, who is with the U.S. National Institute of Health, Bethesda, Maryland, shared the following at the NIH meeting in February 7, 2000. I am now of the view that the probable cause of chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and other systemics is the mycoplasma. Brucella is a disease agent that doesn't kill people. This is where it gets really, really crazy. Brucella is a disease agent that doesn't kill people, it disables them. But according to Dr. Donald MacArthur of the Pentagon, appearing before a congressional committee in 1969, 4 researchers found that if they had mycoplasma at a certain strength, and this is absolutely appalling, actually if they had it to the 10th power, it would develop into AIDS, and the person would die from it within a reasonable period of time because it could bypass the natural human defense. If the strength was at 108, the person would manifest with chronic fatigue syndrome and or fibromyalgia. We'll stop right there for a second, and we'll just note that CDC, Center for Disease Control, does not recognize fibromyalgia as a disease. What they call it and how they recognize it is a severe acute rheumatoid arthritis. What's very interesting is that they also don't recognize chronic Lyme disease. No such thing. What they're interested right now at CDC, it becomes very apparent when you go through their website. What they're interested in doing is, like the DSM, sitting down and arguing about what we should call it. So it's fantastic. On CDC, there's a huge debate between whether or not we should call it chronic Lyme disease, which they believe there's no such thing, or should we call it chronic Lyme syndrome. This is what they're sitting and debating as we're sitting having this conversation. What's appalling as you go through the CDC information and as you go through the standard conventional information is that they will give you little pieces, little snippets of what's actually happening in the body, the common denominators between not just what's happening for people amidst these diseases, but what's happening amidst all these diseases. You find the exact same fundamental traits. Primarily, what you'll see as we get into it is deregulation of the autonomic nervous system, whereby the client's body pushes into the central nervous system, is using hormone, what should be microhormone by the autonomic nervous system, is using hormones such as serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and GABA. It is using them as regulators via the central nervous system, downstreaming these hormones as a means of regulation. So unanimously, what we see amidst all of these clients, and I did a 2-year study with heart rate variability, in fact, to prove this, looking at neurosystemic disease, every single chronically ill patient I looked at, as far as the body's ability for regulation, was regulating from the central nervous system, not regulating in either open regulation or in the autonomic nervous system. Many of us think that it's sympathetic, parasympathetic, and this is in fact the mechanism of how the body works to manage and regulate. However, there is a third phase of regulation that most of us have never been introduced to, and that's when the central nervous system takes over, because the autonomic nervous system has thrown its arms up in the air and says, I can't go any further, I can't do anything more. Therefore, the body moves into a protection mechanism where there is no healing potential whatsoever because there is no ability to move into a parasympathetic state. Hence, we see the sleep disruptions amidst all these conditions. We see other types of bowel issues amidst all these conditions because there is no parasympatheticonia, there is no peristalsis, there is no adequate serotonin and dopamine regulation in order to support proper sleep cycles. There is fundamentally, in the onset of all these conditions, deregulation of the autonomic nervous system, and this is one of the points of origin when we approach it from a practitioner standpoint behind the device, working with a client, where that work has to begin. I have protocols, just so all of you feel happy about this. I have protocols for balancing the autonomic nervous system that will be provided on the website, my presentation, as well as the additional 5 presentations taught on my tour, which are very specific to fibro, Lyme, Alzheimer, MS, will also be provided for you as well. So you'll have the presentations and you'll have protocols in tandem with resolution regarding all of this. And we'll go through some of that together today, but of course we have very limited time to cover a very broad topic. So what I really wanted to do for you was paint the picture of actually what it is that we're dealing with, because if you understand that, then we can approach it from a very systematic way, focus on the pathogens in question, co-infections, and work with our device to support that clearing. I will offer you some precursive caution, however, before we move into that. Okay, distribution and testing. So, the major story in the United States begins really in 1970. And if you know the history of Plum Island is an island 10 miles off of the coast of Lyme, Connecticut, hence where Lyme disease gets its name, right? 10 miles south of Lyme, Connecticut. And in 1970, when we first began the observation of these diseases, there's recording of power outages. Power outages that would theoretically affect a Class 5 bioweapons facility such as Plum Island, whereby it was reported that they lost control of a lot of the pathogen that they were working with. So you can see at Plum Island, they brought Dr. Eric Trobe over from Germany based on the German biowarfare weapons programs. Of course, Lyme disease really first reported out of Germany based on traditional Lyme disease, whereby they were just looking at Borrelia infections in ticks. They then took the Borrelia and weaponized it, combined that with programs that were being done in Japan with prion crystals, working with mycoplasma. The history is profound, and it's all there. It's all available for you if you sit down and you do your research. So, understanding that where Plum Island is, being 10 miles due south of Lyme, Connecticut, what's crazy about this is that the Army must have known about the migratory patterns of things like birds and deer that were coming across to the island and then leaving. In fact, they actually must have known that Connecticut boasted one of the largest estuaries for bird migration in the world. And so all of the birds in the United States stop through exactly that area and then migrate out as they fly their patterns over the south. Same thing with the deer. The deer swim over to the island and swim back as far as the ticks. So they knew exactly what they were doing in tandem with this, and it becomes very obvious, again, when you look further at things like this. Okay, top right-hand corner, you can see Plum Island and where it is. The darkest areas on this map are saturation points for the disease. Oh, particularly as it applies to Lyme disease, know that its first reported name in 1970, like fibromyalgia, was rheumatoid arthritis. They called it juvenile onset rheumatoid arthritis. So this one that you're looking at on this map, what you see here is Lyme. In this map, you're looking at HIV. These maps come from Center for Disease Control. Again, look at the saturation points on the northeast corridor, and then Nevada and California on the west coast. Actually, what's very cool about our device is that monastery of herbs, we have very limited ability to actually work with the nosodic pathogen in our device. We don't have directly weaponized mycoplasma nosode. What we do, however, have is a very vast remedy line offered through Monastery of Herbs, whereby they've had the ability to isolate the very different mycoplasmas which have been used in different programs. Those different programs are, in essence, both different cocktails of the virus. It initially starts as a Visna virus combined with mycoplasma. However, depending on where you are in the United States, as this has been ground zero, the United States and Canada, depending on where you are, the cocktail that you received is different. So you'll notice that in your device, under Monastery of Herbs, you have East Coast Lyme, you have West Coast Lyme. You also have bicoastal Lyme. And I guarantee you what we're discussing here is not Borrelia. It is a part. Borrelia is a part of it, but what we're actually discussing is Borrelia. What we're discussing is a weaponized cocktail designed to be adaptive and to go into cells and be very, very difficult to find. It does not show up under the microscope by design. So that's what we're looking at there is HIV. Did you know that HIV associated to the same thing? Probably not. Some of you maybe yes. Now this one's interesting because it slightly deviates. We don't see the northeast corridor. What we see is the middle of the country most affected. And what we're looking at here in particular is MS. You would be surprised to know that the United States government contracted with the Canadian government in 1953 to spray a diluted version of this pathogen over the city of Winnipeg. They chose the city of Winnipeg in particular because we're 500,000 people back in 53. And how many of you have ever heard of Winnipeg? Right? Not so many. If you have heard of it, that's fantastic. I would highly recommend you don't go there. It's where I live. It's very cold. Minus 42 to minus 65 in the winter. This is not a place you really want to ever visit. So they chose the city of Winnipeg and they sprayed it. They sent out mailers, and this is initially how a researcher from Ontario, Dr. Donald Scott, initially amassed a whole bunch of the papers between the US government and the Canadian government talking about how they would dilute this and what they wanted the hospitals and the clinics to track. They gave them specific symptom markers that they wanted to be able to track the gestation of the pathogen that they had sprayed. They summarized at the end of that program that had they sprayed this pathogen in its concentration, that they would have wiped out the city, 1/3 of the city of Winnipeg in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. We now have the highest concentration in the world of MS and fibromyalgia in Winnipeg because our program started earlier. Remember, this pathogen has been designed to be both active and covert. And we're going to go into what that means right now. But that one in particular is MS. Now this one surprised me. Here what you're looking at is heart disease. Most of us thought that bad diet, bacon, high fat, low exercise, more or less the American lifestyle, was the primary cause of heart disease. However, if you look at the saturation point, again, what you see is that same northeast corridor, as well as California and Nevada. Check this out if you actually want to see what's going on here. Oh wait, this one's arthritis. So recognize here what you're looking at is all the fibro, all the Parkinsonian MS, because that's how it's all classified. But here you're looking at heart disease, and this one surprised me the most because I bought, just like everybody else, what I've been fed all my life, thinking that heart disease was in fact what we were told. What you discover as you track these pathogens, what you discover is that the end game by design, where they end up, is within heart and lung. And so with Alzheimer, what kills our clients? How do they die? Typically, pneumonia, right? Biggie. Heart failure or pneumonia. And then they summarize heart disease. But in fact, what we're dealing with here is mycoplasma. You can see how it changed and the saturation points as they began to play with the pathogen. It's just astounding. That's from 72 to current day, to 2010. It's the exact same northeast corridor and Nevada and California. It's just appalling. We talked about the birds and the deer. I got ahead of myself. All right, so what is it? Mycoplasma acts by entering into individual cells of the body depending upon the genetic predisposition of the client is where they tend to be hit. You may develop neurosystemic degenerative disease if the pathogen destroys certain cells in your brain, or you may develop Crohn's colitis if the pathogen invades and destroys cells in the lower bowel. And we're initially only talking about the initial saturation. However, this is really interesting because when I started to go into this, so I'm looking at the physicality and I'm looking at the one component, but in my work I always like to be aware of the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. So looking for the emotional correlation or what may create the susceptibility for a person, we have two potential factors. One is constitutional weakness. Right? Some people are wood types, some people are metal types, etc. And we have fundamental constitutional weakness, being that these pathogens are adaptive, designed to be so. They are also opportunistic. They're going to move into an area of weakness and exploit that weakness. Once the mycoplasma gets into the cell, it can lie there doing nothing, sometimes for 10, 20, or up to 30 years. But if trauma, and this is where it becomes really interesting and pertinent to the conversations about autism, the conversations about all these diseases, it can lie there doing nothing for 10 to 20, 30 years being dormant. But if trauma occurs like an accident or a vaccination that doesn't take, the mycoplasma can become triggered. Triggered is an interesting word as we continue on in this lecture, because as we talk about triggers, it's funny, last night we included this picture. Ron and I were putting my presentation together at like 4 in the morning last night, because I do everything last minute, typical me. And when I first read this slide, regardless of what it said, vaccines are safe, I read vaccines are not safe. How interesting. Right? Like that was what I saw on the page. Anyways, they can be triggered by things like vaccines. So are vaccines the cause of autism? Are vaccines or a catalyst too? Yes. However, right through the CDC, right through Bethesda, Maryland, and medical journals, you find words like this, because it is, once we go into this, because it's only the DNA particle of the bacterium, it doesn't have any organelles to process its own nutrients. So it grows by uptaking preformed sterols from the host, and it literally kills cells. The cells rupture, and what is left just gets dumped into the bloodstream. Now, going back to the word trigger, the mycoplasma has been engineered to be very small, undetectable, dormant, and triggered. Now, in order for something to be triggered, what does that mean? So it's saying it can be dormant for 10, 20, or 30 years. Vaccination, antibiotic, a major car accident, an emotional trauma can trigger it. So, and this is through CDC. This is through official source. This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't non-conventional. They use the word triggered over and over and over again. Triggered implies something was there to begin with. So when you have this disease isolated in 46, when you have the chief urologist for the same company coming out and saying everybody's infected, and then they start using words like trigger, what they're telling you is, in fact, we are all infected with mycoplasma. So this lecture today, these protocols, they do not only pertain to the client that comes into your office complaining of the symptom of these diseases. You bought this system as a wellness tool and a preventative tool to prevent the onset of degeneration and disease, I imagine. Yes? Yes? For your friends, for your family, for your clients? So then who does this material, this lecture, who does understanding this mycoplasma and the co-infection associates, who does this information apply to? Sorry? All of us. All of us. Now, some of the stuff I wasn't able to put into the lecture, time constraint, etc., are things available to you that can be supportive of this other than the device, because we need multiple solutions to this problem. Now, studies have been done recently which have shown, in fact, you gotta love nature. Colloidal silver actually having the ability to disrupt the DNA of the mycoplasma. It's fantastic. It's been one of the only things that has been found to work towards resolution. However, generalized colloidal silver, general colloidal, will not work because the pathogen is too small. As they just said, the reason they can't find it on a microscope is because it does not have its own cell structure. It attaches to a cell like a parasite, a very, very small parasite. As it is so small, it's unable to be detected through lab work. I believe there's one doctor in New Zealand able to detect it through DNA markers that he finds, but not directly with the ability to find the mycoplasma itself. Now, in studies, they have proven that in studies through tissue sample, they have proven that nano-colloidal silver, it has to be nano. Nano-colloidal silver is small enough, if it's laid under 5 nanomicrons, has the capacity to enter the cell. Now, if you're gonna research this or look into it, what I would advise is ensure that the product that you're using is not ionic. Ionic colloidal, which in fact does not have the physical colloid particle in the solution, ionic has been studied and proven to be neurodegenerative. Do not use ionic silver. You want nanocolloid. As far as the ppm of the solution, ppm can go parts per million. ppm can go anywhere from 3 to 20. That's fine. You're not going to OD on colloidal silver. The blue bloods, back where we got colloidal silver from the French during the bubonic plague, when they turned blue, hence the blue bloods, they were drinking massive concentrations and not colloid in the same way that we are. They were just drinking silver, quite literally, silver solution. So what I would recommend is, as a brand that I've found in my own studies, you can look for MESO, M-E-S-O, MESO silver. I don't sell this stuff. There's no sign up. There's no MLM that I know of or anything like that. I'm not telling you about this for any other purpose than you finding the right things to work with in your practice. MESO silver is at about 3 nanomites or nanomicrons, and they lay at 20 parts per million. Because all of these diseases also end up, you know, the Lyme disease, once they've used the dioxycycline to resolve the Borrelia infection, we still end up in chronic Lyme syndrome with all of the fibro-related symptoms. Things end up in the disease or in the joints, in the muscles, in the nerves. So MESO particularly, and this is just a sidebar from my lecture, but MESO silver has a formula where they do a silica silver. And so the silica is laid at 7 parts per million, I believe. The silver 8 parts per million, so you don't lose anything within the formula. However, as a steady daily regimen and something that should be taken by everybody and all of our kids and all of our cousins, uncles, aunts, and even animals, this silver has been, at this point, one of the only studied and semi-proven supplemental sources to be able to really combat the nature of this pathogen. Sorry? Where is it from? The U.S. I believe New Jersey. 2 doctors. One is a medical doctor with a PhD in engineering. Another is a virologist. They started the company. Is there a question? No? Good. Because we still have a long way to go. So like I said, if CDC claims that these diseases are triggered, then the implication is something there to begin with and waiting to be activated. This is where it gets even more interesting. What they talk about, I explained earlier that in all of the material, when you read in the pathology of all these conditions, what becomes obvious is Lyme disease will talk about serotonin dumps found in the bloodstream. Fibromyalgia will talk about IGF, growth hormone dumps, or insulin like growth factor found in the bloodstream. When we start finding hormone in blood, understand what's happening is the body is regulating via central nervous system. Is this something that is generally understood by most? The difference, so that you understand what's happening here, the difference between autonomic nervous regulation and central nervous regulation is in essence the difference between a text message conversation and regular post mail. The autonomic nervous system is very fast, very fluid. It sends micro amounts of GABA, serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine, epinephrine, norepinephrine to the brain through via the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis. The HPA axis then regulates based on ultimately the conversation happening between the heart and the brain, what the body needs via micro amounts of transmitters of these hormones used as transmitter to the brain to stimulate the body's regulation to its environmental need. Now, at the end of the day, and understand this, in the human experience, it's only been in the last 50, 60 years that our relaxation is sitting in front of a television projecting to us at 8,000 frames per second, or flicker rate of 8,000 flickers per second, in training our brains into a theta pattern of hypersuggestibility, whereby we're watching buildings explode, machine guns go off, and this is what we call relaxation in the 21st century, right? When you leave work, do you actually leave work anymore? No, email. Right? You're emailing, you're Facebooking, WhatsApp, WeChat, on and on and on and on. We are so overstimulated by the environment at this point that just the lifestyle that we're existing in within the 21st century is supporting the deregulation beyond the bombardment of all the toxicity, be it the industrial toxins or weaponized pathogen toxins that we're presently experiencing. We are under a bombardment. And the autonomic nervous system moves out of that sympathetic dominant state, and it throws its arms up in the air and it says, this is not working. I cannot manage the load. What happens then is the central nervous system kicks in. Now we start dumping hormone to blood into organs as a means of body regulating itself. However, this is like life support. If you've ever watched Star Trek back in the day, or any other sci-fi movie where main systems go down, backup power kicks in. Backup power is only designed to keep you going. It's not designed for repair and service and to support. It's just to maintain life. Would you not say that many of your clients, many of the people that you see out there are just sustaining? Just sustaining, but is their life, or are they wasting? Right? They're wasting. So what's interesting is they'll go so far as to tell us things like PTSD, anxiety disorders, have been prevalent and found in the majority of these conditions. They're identifying PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is really what I just explained, central nervous system regulation pattern. They're identifying this exactly as how I've just explained, by finding large amount of stress hormone in the blood, which it should not be. And so what that tells you is the body is regulating based on hormones. Now this is also really interesting. Studies have reported higher rates of severe emotional and physical abuse in patients with fibromyalgia compared to the general population. Very interesting. And then you got to love the contradiction that comes through CDC Next. Most often, this blew me away that some idiot actually wrote this. Most often the abusers are family members. I sat there going, what? Most often the abusers are family members or partners. A history of sexual abuse does not seem to be a risk factor for fibromyalgia. However, women who have been raped may face an increased risk of the disease. What? Is that not a direct contradiction? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And this actually, because I read this, this led me to then want to understand what is the emotional link, what's the Hamer causation factor going on here, right? Because I really don't like to consider the body in a linear, reductionistic way. We are a multi-dimensional system. I want to understand what's happening at all levels within the human experience in response to this. So I contacted Dr. Karolina Markovic. Does anybody know who Dr. Karolina Markovic is? She is the #1 source to Hamer. She does all of Hamer's translations from German, Austrian into English. And she is our primary educator in North America for Hamer medicine. So I contracted Karolina. I said, hey, Karolina, I need some help. I'm going on tour tomorrow. I didn't do any of my backup research really properly for my tour upcoming. If you could quickly tell me what the Hamer conflicts are for MS, ALS, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, and chronic fatigue syndrome, that would be of great help, because I'm lazy. Karolina responded the next day to me, and what she said was, you know what, Adam, I'd love to help you, but the reality is there are no Hamer conflicts direct, specific to these diseases. What? Hamer describes everything. How is it that there's not direct Hamer conflict for these diseases? So I talked to Karolina about this a bit, because what we looked at was, well, there may not be any direct Hamer conflict for the disease itself. Both the healing and the phases of healing, be it in conflict phase and or healing phase, those things matched a lot of the symptom pathology of the things that we were looking at. But then so did the Hamer conflicts describing the types of degenerative behavior that was being seen. So for example, and this was what became very interesting, for example, when we're looking at Parkinson's or Parkinsonian MS, we're seeing the body agitated, physically agitated, right? This is motor conflict. The body is in motor conflict, meaning inability to move forward, move backward, etc. Inability to move. When we see memory-related issues towards the Alzheimer dementia side of the table, what we're actually looking at, if you look at ADD and ADHD behavior, what we're actually looking at is separation-based conflict, the need to separate from or feeling separate from. Now, why would Karolina say to me that there were no direct conflict? What I came to realize was because Hamer looks at generally a 6-month cross-section from conflict to physiological manifestation, or the body playing out the conflict in its process, right? However, what I thought and what I summarized or theorized was, does anybody in this room know anybody that's ever repeated their patterns in life? Does that ever happen? No, right? Never happens. We learn from all of our mistakes, don't we? We never repeat our patterns. Well, in my own experience of Hamer medicine in my life, what I came to understand was the way the mechanisms work. So for example, if I were to show you the pictures of me working on the Olympics, what you would see is a very potato head looking Adam. I have no beard. One of the only times in my life I didn't have a beard, because I don't really have a prominent neck, so the beard separates everything that's going on here. I went out to the Olympics, and right before my father passed away, I was actually teaching a Quantum Academy's beginner course. I had 30 students in front of me on the Friday, and they were burying him on that day. There was no way for me to get across the country, to get away from the class and make it to my father's funeral. So immediately following that, and other conflict that I was playing out, immediately following that, my beard fell out. My hair fell out. I developed alopecia. Working in China, I tried talking to Chinese doctors about it, and what they told me was in Chinese medicine, what we call that is a ghost cut your hair. That's what they call alopecia in direct translation in Chinese, is a ghost cut your hair. So while I was sleeping, a ghost opted to cut my hair. Clearly that wasn't sufficient in my investigation of what was happening with me, so I began to look at the Hamer conflict. What I understood was alopecia developed from a powerlessness conflict. The inability, for example, motor conflict, powerlessness, there was the inability for me to get to my father's funeral. That conflict created my alopecia because I'd played out others throughout my lifetime. Now, a couple years down the road, I fell in love with this beautiful woman, which was lovely and is lovely. However, when you're married, you're not supposed to do that, right? So, honoring in my contract, I took myself out of that situation, but I was powerless to be in a situation that I wanted to be in. Suddenly, again, my beard started falling out. Now, the death of a father, far more severe a powerlessness conflict than the loss of a girlfriend, right? Far more severe. Yet, suddenly my beard started falling out again. What I came to understand was that throughout a lifetime, we repeat our patterns. The more we repeat our patterns in emotional trauma and conflict, it's like pressing a button. And the more I press that button, the easier it is to press the button, right? And hence, this is the chronic model in Hamer, how we go through a lifetime. We manifest the same types of issues over and over and over again. We press the button of conflict over and over and over again. And the body then stores that conflict in specific places. If you're unfamiliar with the Hamer model, let me just prove it to you for a moment. We'll stop here. Do you remember when your heart was broken for the first time? Bobby or Susie on the playground started kissing Jimmy, and you were like, oh my God. Do you remember when that happened? First time your heart was broken? Where did you feel it? Where did you feel it? Your stomach? In your heart. You felt it in your heart. You felt it in your chest. The chest felt hollow, empty, like somebody had stabbed you, correct? So holy shit, we all had, oh, excuse my language. Garrett, I've been doing so good. So we all had the same emotional trauma. We all physiologically felt it in the same place. Do you remember when you had to speak publicly for the first time? Where'd you feel that? Stomach and throat, right? Again, we all had the same emotional sensory input. We put it in the exact same place. So either we're really schizophrenic, we're all the same person, and in fact what they've been saying was we're all one is in fact a thing, which I kind of believe. I'm really schizophrenic and I'm talking to myself in this room. Or what we've been shown there is that we categorize emotion, we categorize life experience in very specific areas of the body. As we go through a lifetime of that, we create weakness and susceptibility. I was in a debate earlier with Desi, not a debate, but a conversation, and what we were talking about was pleomorphism versus viral theory. And the difference being that bacteria, fungus, and virus in pleomorphism are the immune system. Viral theory being bullshit for the purpose of selling pharmaceuticals. However, I mean, we're back to Pasteur versus Béchamp, right? However, with the weaponizing of pathogen, the messing with genetics, we have created viral theory as an actual thing. So now what we're dealing with is both pleomorphism as well as viral theory. They are both prevalent, and this is why Hamer was unable to offer us direct conflict in associate, because these are not natural processes. The degenerative breakdown that's happening in the body is happening as a byproduct of a man-made pathogen. It is not a natural process. We can, through Hamer, understand where we have weakness and susceptibility, work to support the strengthening of that weakness and susceptibility through the release of conflict and trauma. However, there's no direct Hamer constellation associate to any one of these diseases because they are not natural processes. Oh, sorry, if anybody's looking for pronunciation and you're American, they say process. Every time I teach in the States, they make fun of me, but I don't know where they get the A from. Process. There's no A. It's process. Canadians are right. And Donald Trump is not running for our electorate, thank God. Okay, so I just really quickly wanted to show you some of the stupid, absurd statements made by CDC as it applies to these diseases. So Lyme disease is a curable condition. Nearly all patients, 95%, improve after a short course of antibiotics. In very rare cases, patients continue to complain of persistent, non-specific symptoms such as fatigue, muscle aches, cognitive problems, headaches, lasting years, and completing antibiotic treatments for the initial infection. So meaning people are still, even though it's a treatable disease with 95%, people are still complaining of these symptoms, but it's not real. Do you remember what they used to say with fibromyalgia? Take up line dancing. You're just bored. Imagine your doctor said that to you. Okay, so this, again, like I said earlier, they are focused right now on debating whether or not we should call this chronic Lyme disease or Lyme syndrome. So the syndrome is related, the syndrome is referred to as post-Lyme disease syndrome, which can resemble fibromyalgia, so they're telling you right there what I opened with, which is these are all the same disease. Can resemble symptoms of fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue symptom, and other neurodegenerative systemic diseases. Now, what's exciting and what you discover when you research this is that you really have to take pieces of what they tell you about Lyme disease, pieces of what they tell you about fibromyalgia, pieces of what they tell you about MS. You discover that all the symptom pathology that they're describing is virtually the same, but you have to take it all and you have to combine it. And so therefore, as we start to investigate what are the cocktails, what are the co-infections that we have to manage in tandem with supporting the body in a healing of this adaptive pathogen, we have to look into all of these diseases in order to find all of the associations. So particularly in Lyme disease, we have more research than has been done in any of these any of the others. And what's interesting is when you read this, the majority of the research that's been done has been done by patients because they're frustrated. Their doctors are not offering them solution, and so they're going to alternative sources for means of measure. So at this point, what they've found is that the majority of chronic Lyme disease patients have at least one co-infection, with 30% reporting 2 or more co-infections. Now, as far as the co-infections, some of them are listed. These are not the only co-infections, but as far as some of them are listed down here, we have Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, Mycoplasma, Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever, and Anaplasma. Now, particularly the Ehrlichia and the Anaplasma, you do not have access to in your matrix. Those are not nosodic or isodic remedies, or not rather isodic. There are no nosodic remedies and or other remedies built into the software to support these. So we're somewhat limited with what's available in the device, and therefore we have to get creative. And you'll see in my protocols things like using the stimulate reaction or duplicate remedy panel to invert, using hololinguistics to invert Anaplasma, to invert Ehrlichia, because we do not have access within the database to those particular pathogens. Otherwise, most of the stuff we have. However, as we get into co-infection and as you go through the protocols, which I will make available for you on the BHO website, what you'll discover is that there are more co-infections than what are listed amidst all these diseases. And it depends on what program was run. So for example, in Texas, what they find in the cocktail is all of what's been described here, plus parvo B19. They were experimenting with human parvovirus. They weaponized parvovirus and made it able to interact with us. In the East Coast, they were combining stuff with feline leukemia. Has anybody ever seen feline leukemia show up for your clients? Huh? Sure you have, right? That's why, because it is part of this cocktail. So as we address it, we have to both go after the fundamental nosodes of things like the mycoplasma, like the Borrelia, but then we also have to be aware of all the co-infections and work to clean out all the sarcodes of these nosodic pathogens. Okay, and more brilliance from the CDC boasts that antibiotics are not helpful for post-Lyme disease syndrome. And this is really interesting because it goes so far as to say in some rare cases, patients experience a new onset of symptoms after antibiotic treatment, such as the bullseye rash. So what they're saying here is people have been treated. They had Lyme disease, the standard Lyme disease. If you weren't tick bit in the United States, it's not Lyme disease as far as they're concerned. If there wasn't a tick bite and there wasn't a bullseye rash develop, not Lyme disease. Again, I'm calling BS on that one. But what they're saying is, and this is where it gets crazy, so they've given people after the initial bite dioxycycline. That should resolve the Borrelia infection. However, later, years later often, a client takes an antibiotic, often for something unrelated, or gets a vaccine or a flu vaccine. What happens is they develop what you see there, the bullseye rash, typical to Lyme disease. They develop the bullseye rash again without ever being tick bitten, and they develop the rash in the exact same area where it was the first time. However, CDC says that this is not the old infection. This is a new infection. That's what they say. It is not the previous infection, it's a new infection. Even though there was no tick bite, the bullseye rash showed up in the exact same place, and the only intervention was the vaccine. So you can see in their write-ups, they're playing with us. They're telling us triggered, but then this is not the old infection. It's absolutely asinine. It is absolutely appalling. The only thing I can summarize is that this was all engineered and built for two purposes. One, population reduction. Two, to take big pharma and turn it into the largest business in the world from pretty much 1946 to 26. You think? It's very obvious, right? What is the most powerful industry in the world? Sorry? The drugs, right? Drug companies. But in how many years did it take them to become that? When did pharmacology become so powerful? Pretty much from 1946 till present day. There's definitely no cross-correlation here. As I said at the beginning of the lecture, we're going to look behind the curtain for the wizard. Don't look behind the curtain. You don't want to see what's there. We don't want to see what's there because it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. So, I'm going to offer the solution to all of this. How much time do I have? Where are we at right now? Because I could keep going for the rest of the afternoon. Based on how you all look, you could keep going for the rest of the afternoon, which is awesome. How much, where are we at? Sorry? I can't hear you. 2:45? So I can go for like another 15 minutes maybe? Oh shit, I don't have that much material. Just kidding. Okay, so, but we are going to take a quick pee break because I do need to do that. So what I propose as a solution is very, very focused zapping. Very focused zapping work in tandem with the cleansing of SAR codes. And in my protocol, I'm going to show you how that works. Before we get into the protocols, though, I want to offer some precursive. Caution. Conscious caution. I am likely in these protocols going to outline a more aggressive approach to the management of the, or not even the management, to the healing of these diseases than likely you have ever applied in tandem with your device. Now, thus far this year, I've taught 8 courses. 8 courses, well over 200 practitioners that I've taught this material to. I must, at this point, at least have 35, if not 40 emails from practitioners worried about the nature of the Herxheimer detoxes that they have stimulated. So as we go in and look at protocols and approach to the management of this, I will advise you to ensure that your client has been properly prepared before you approach this work. So what are the precursors? The precursors are that you already have their bodies generally detoxed, that there's relatively decent function in the organs of elimination, the channels of elimination, to support the toxic burden and the toxic load that you're going to be unleashing on your clients as you start taking adaptive pathogen out of adaptive states, pulling it into alarm reactive states whereby you're zapping it. Remember, if you've ever seen the zapping of a pathogen on YouTube via Rife, or you've ever had the opportunity to witness it under a microscope, what you see, and if you haven't, jump on YouTube tonight when you leave. Google in the search bar, type in Rife destruction of pathogen. Watch what happens. When the pathogen explodes, what's released is all the nasty, toxic crap. I said crap, Geert. All the nasty, toxic crap that's inside it. That ends up unleashed on the bloodstream. The body has to process it. If the liver, the kidneys, and the bowel, the lymph, and the skin, and the detox channels are not properly prepared to support this, your client is going to feel as though they were hit by a truck. Make sure that they are adequately hydrated before they come in for the session. Minimum 1.5 liters to 2 liters of water in them before they come in. You want that blood running thin. Ensure that following the session, there's another 1.5 liters minimum of water that goes into them, keeping that blood very dilute, working with additional tools. Meaning, if they don't have the benefit of an infrared sauna or an electro-chi foot bath or whatever you like to work with to be supportive of detox, if they don't have tools, and many of them don't, make sure they get their butts, or that they've already done it as a precursor before they came in for this session, to the health food store with a lot of Epsom salt, and that they're prepared at the end of the day to jump into that hot bath with the Epsom salt to support the detox and the elimination and the release of these pathogens, of this toxicity that we're going to be unleashing. 5 out of the 35 reported ended up in such severe Herx reactions that they were in the hospital. So it's very important that you precurse your client that, look, once we get into this, you may not feel fantastic. This is nasty, nasty, nasty stuff that we're engaging. And as you go through the process of healing it, you may not be very comfortable. By introducing your client to the expectation potential of the Herx, you will vastly diffuse it. Because if the client's sitting there going, oh, I feel like crap, well, they told me I would, well, this is great. Create that paradigm. When they call you and they say, oh my God, I feel so horrible after your session, respond with, "That's fantastic." This is exactly what we want to see your body doing. That's fantastic. Ensure that you're confident, because they are going to go into fear. Described in all of these conditions, Lyme, fibro, ALS, etc., is hypervigilance to symptom. The client has massive fear because they've been existing in such a deficit state for so long, so often, that once they feel the slightest inclination of a symptom, the hypervigilance reaction to that kicks in. They are very sensitive and they are very much in fear. Ensure that you prepare them adequately such that they're aware of the fact that they may not feel fantastic, whereby they're not going to kick into a ton of fear as they approach this, and they're going to allow the experience. We talked about the body being prepared in adequate detoxification before this zapping. The other thing that you really, really want to be very focused on, and my brain just went blank, detox, hypervigilance, is addressing the deregulation of the autonomic nervous system, as we talked about earlier. In all of these diseases, when you go on to CDC, what you find is exactly what I was explaining. Some will talk about the serotonin in the blood, some will talk about the growth hormone in the blood, but all of them are telling you that there is a hormone dump found in blood, telling us that the autonomic nervous system is completely deregulated, likely off, and that the central nervous system is managing regulation. Before we have the possibility and or potential to support, stimulate healing for the people, for our clients, ourselves, to be able to process this, we must ensure that the body's able to achieve sympathetic and parasympathetic conia. If you don't work with a measure that can show you that, I would strongly advise you to. You can buy heart rate variability devices on the market right now for anywhere from about $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000. Great one out of France called HeartQuest. Amazing. What's awesome about it is that for the client, they have the ability to look at the pictures and, without an education or a background in this, go, I was like that, I am like that, wow, I'm so much better. That's what you're looking for out of a quantitative measure, something that can connect to the client without any precursive information or education, so they can go, wow, this is where I was and this is where I am. By affirming that to them and watching their autonomic and endocrine systems shift and change, even with what was subtle and can often not be felt, we affirm the biology of belief. We invoke the 1/3 piece of the pie in healing known as the placebo factor, further enabling them to come into belief and understanding as it applies to their healing process. But in order for them to be able to shift into a healing state in tandem with the work that we're doing, they need to be regulated in their endocrine systems, in their autonomic nervous systems. So what I've provided for you and what you will have access to is a series of 8 different protocols designed to be used together. Not together, but I mean session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4, session 5. The precursive work to that is the re-regulation of the endocrine system. I will also provide you a protocol for stabilizing endocrine, whereby you are bringing into balance all the stress hormone we talked about, working to unwind the endocrine system and bring the body back, or bring the body regulation back into what is ideal, which would be open regulation, whereby it's using what it needs from the central nervous system and what it needs from the autonomic nervous system to support adequate regulation. That needs to be done as a precursor. Once those 2 things have been facilitated, clients properly detoxed, endocrine system is rebalanced and regulated and functioning, at this point now we can start to target this pathogen aggressively and support its release. Again, make sure they're properly prepared with lots of hydration and that they're detoxing after. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Please keep it down to 5 minutes because I really need to pee, and then we'll get back into it. Okay.
you enjoyed it.